Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we're doing book reviews on this channel, trying to find the best of every book and every genre we can come up with. Today we're reviewing the book Dauntless by Jack Campbell, part of the series The Lost Fleet, a science fiction book that is hard science fiction, so you have things actually trying to make scientific sense instead of something more Star Warsy where, you just have to not pay attention too closely to the science. So the plot on this book is that it starts out, you're introduced to a man named John Blackjack Gary, who has apparently been rescued from a hibernation pod, and you kind of get the impression he's been out very recently, within a week, just a couple weeks, not very long that he's been out. He was put in this hibernation pod about 100 years ago, so he's missed 100 years. When he went into the pod, his alliance group of planet systems was at war with another human empire called the Syndicate, and now 100 years later, they are still at war. And it has not been going well. The tactics have deteriorated. Everything seems to have been lost in the 100 years of so many people dying. So he comes into the world with a reputation that he doesn't know anything about. Everybody's like, Blackjack, he was the great hero of the war. And he's like, what? Because apparently his last stand, holding off the enemies so his fleet that he was part of could get away, was heroic enough to come down as a legend. And so him being revived, everybody's looking at him, hero worshipping, and he's kind of like, what? So it enters the scene at the end of a conflict that his ship is part of a fleet that has lost the battle. So the enemy combatants are telling his fleet, surrender or die, kind of thing. And his commanding officer, I'm not going to get all of the details, but dies. And he is left in charge of the fleet. We're not sure how many ships, but it's, 100 ships. And all the people that involved in those ships. And they're like, what can we do? We're trapped. Our exit is over there behind enemy lines, and the enemy is going to totally annihilate us. And he goes, well, what about that exit point behind us? What about that? I'm like, well, I guess. That'll be a slower route home, but yeah, we could try that. So he basically, his decision-making power saves his fleet. And now the rest of this story and the rest, I think, of the series is him trying to get this fleet home by jumping to systems that the Syndicate won't be there ahead of them and won't guess where they're going and not ambush them or whatever. They're trying to get home in a roundabout way to get there. And they have with them a hypernet key, which allows them to go directly from the Alliance system to the home world of the Syndicate. So the Syndicate is not going to stop trying to get them. Okay, so that's kind of the plot, is him trying to get them home. And then there's a lot of problems along the way. So they've got a really slow ship that's very important to the fleet because it does, creation of ammunition, for example. It manufactures replacement parts. Think of a moving shipyard, but it's slow, and they've got to protect it as they go because it's their only one. And they've got problems of the political variety. You've got a whole bunch of fleets with ships with captains of them, and not all of them want to follow Blackjack Gary. And they don't always agree with his decision-making skills, and they all want glory for themselves, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's all these things going along. It made for a very, very interesting book. I'm going to give you, spoiler, I'm giving it a thumbs up. Totally, I really enjoyed it. This was the kind of book that it was really fun to read. But let me talk about some of the things I liked. So first, the characters. So our main character is pretty likable, both in his character and his decision-making skills. For example, the culture he comes into, because they've been at war for so long, some of the high morals have slipped over the years. So for example, the Navy kind of execute prisoners instead of, allowing them to escape. Or other questionable things that he's like, no, we are not doing it that way. We're not going to leave anybody behind. We're not going to be cruel to prisoners of war. We're not going to destroy civilian populations, etc., etc. So he is trying to restore the honor of his fleet. And I really like that. I mean, I like that he is an honorable person. Duty is a high value to him. I like a lot of that. Having said that, however, our Mr. Jack Blackagary is a little bit of a Mary Sue, because it seems like everything he does is the right move, not necessarily with a perfect outcome, but usually the bad outcomes aren't directly his fault. Like, it wasn't his decision making that made that. For example, one ship gets destroyed not because of his decision-making skills, but because somebody he gave orders to did not follow them out correctly. Or, he wasn't aware of information because it's been 100 years, things have changed, so he didn't know certain facts before he gave an order. Things like that it doesn't come about as him making bad decisions because of bad character, just circumstances. And because of that, it does come across a little Mary Sue-ish. I will say, though, it's fun. It's kind of like a superhero kind of thing, where you root for them, even if they are superpowered. Who cares? And I liked him as a character, so I'm okay with him being, right and doing good job and, saving the fleet without a single loss at a battle or something like that. Because it's fun. I don't care if it's unrealistic. Okay, they were clever problem solving. So they came across several problems as they went through, and I thought several of the solutions were creative and good, smart thinking. So for example, he has one captain that is a problem, and so he's like, how can I get rid of him? I mean, you can't just go up and execute the guy. Aha! I will promote him into obscurity. So he promoted him into a position where he basically does nothing but like a research project off to the side where he doesn't bother anybody. He's like, problem solved. And so that's, I think, a creative, fun way to solve that particular problem. The space battles are fun. It's got lots of space battles. If you want space battles, this is the book for you. Lots of different ships trying to maneuver in such a way that they could defeat lots of other ships. It's not really a one-on-one battle for the most part, although the ship he is on does fight, but it's more fleet overall maneuvers with another fleet overall maneuvers and how that plays out. Sometimes it's much fewer ships, sometimes it's more. Yeah. And whether they flee, whether they fight, whether they stand. Then, of course, the hard science part. So you've got huge spaces between the fleets, and they're coming at each other at a noticeable fraction of the speed of light. And how does that affect battle? Because there's distortion in understanding where somebody is in space the faster they go. And the relativistic problems of if I shoot now, where will that impact where the opponent is in space in the future when we're both going at 0.1% of the speed of light or whatever it is. That made for very interesting. The acceleration, and you have to accelerate to this point and then decelerate enough to get to this point. It felt very real in that respect. Obviously the idea of hyperspace and stuff is not real, but it has that element of reality and dealing with actual physics that makes it that hard science, and they did a good job with that. I did like the political troubles. I think that's kind of fun when you have to navigate not just problems with battle, but also interpersonal problems and the politics of who has seniority versus who has experience versus who is it actually good at that position, and how do you do that in such a way that everybody else still respects you. And yeah, he doesn't always get that perfect, there's still grumbling and stuff, but anyway, it's fun. I liked the fact that there's not a lot that I have to give warnings for in this book. There's no nudity, sex, there's no real, I didn't really notice a lot in the way of bad words, some minor profanity. There's no real gore, despite the fact that there's lots of battles. It's pretty much bloodless. So I like that fact about this book. So what did I not like? There are a couple things. It's not the world's most perfect book. It is very much kind of pulpy. It's you don't take it that seriously. It's meant to be fun, not anything more than that. There is some confusion with space battles. Now, the more ships you get in a battle, obviously, the more difficult it can be to figure out what's going on, the more difficult it can be to picture what a maneuver is. It calls out a technical term, go do this thing, and you're like, what was that again? What does it mean when they're in a particular formation? Can you picture that very well? I thought the author did a decent job, but it can still have some confusion going on with that. It was decent for what the author did. One thing I didn't like was there was some lack of specifics. So, for example, how big is this fleet that he's working with, that he's trying to get home? I really don't know. It seems to be at least 100 ships, because he keeps mentioning, here, we lost a couple of these ships and a couple of these ships, but you don't know much about that, and it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. It's not like, you have 3 ships, and if you lose one, the world is going to end. It's more like, you have 100 ships, well, we lost one, bummer, but we're fine. But how many exactly is many ships? Is it actually more like 1,000 ships? Is it more like 50 ships? I really can't tell. So some lack of specifics there, and it may be purposefully done by the author, because they may have said, look, if we don't give a specific, we could just keep losing ships, and there's no count, so it's fine. We could lose 300 ships, and it's still fine from a story writing perspective. You just it keeps shedding, but never actually getting smaller, So the same thing with people, how many other captains are there? How many people are on the ship that he's on? There's not a lot of specifics, so it's kind of hard to scale, hard to underjudge the size of what's happening when you have things like that. There is, finally, my last critique on this would be there's some repetitive stuff where you're kind of like, yeah, we've heard it before. The big thing would be a constant criticism by somebody on his ship that he's giving in to his own legend, so to speak. He's feeling that he's as invincible as people think he is, and so would make wrong decisions or do a power grab. Like, for example, he needs to get some captains out of the way because they're not listening to him, give orders, and thus endangering the whole fleet. But if he goes and does a purge of every captain that doesn't listen to him, that's kind of turning into a tyrant, right? So there's that balance he needs to come across. And he constantly is thinking about this in his head, constantly, am I doing what I'm being accused of doing as far as, making a power grab, or am I okay? No, I think I'm still okay. So that can get a little repetitive. Yes, we've heard this discussion before. Let's move on. Okay, my overall is a big thumbs up. So there are some books where you like the beginning and you're really excited to get to the end, but the end, in the middle, you're just kind of like, yes, let's get going. Go. Let's go to the end. Maybe I should just skip to the end. Well, this book is not like that. This is one where I was interested in reading the middle. Like, I didn't have any interest in skipping to the end. I wanted to read all of the adventures till we get to the end. So that makes for a nice, I mean, this was a book I did not want to put down to go to dinner, that kind of book. So that gives me a positive experience that I wanted to share with somebody else. I would definitely recommend it to somebody else who is interested in sci-fi, or even just military or adventures or superheroes or anything like that, where you're just like a powerful main character who's going to save the day. That was fun. All right, so part 2, what am I going to do next? I'm going to review the book Wind in the Willows. So it's a children's classic that I have never read. And I assume that it's fantastic because I think it's on like a lot of best of lists. Like if you got a list of the most important children's books ever, and there were 100 books on there, it's almost guaranteed that Wind in the Willows would be on there. So you kind of assume it's going to be a good book. All I know about it is it's about animals. I think, in fact, I know that Disney did a sort of movie on it at one point, a half movie. It was bundled with something else. It was short. It wasn't a full 2 hour or anything. Anyway, but I'll talk about that next week. I hope you will join me. Thank you for watching.